All right, we're live. So we ended the lecture last time kind of in the middle of the first meditation, not really the spot I'd hoped to end the lecture on. I was hoping to finish the first meditation last time. But we got a good ways in. So remember the title of Descartes' First Meditation. This is the kind of a long translation of it. Concerning those things that can be called into doubt. So remember, he's living through the scientific revolution. Things that he had taken for granted to be true turned out to be completely false. Things that seemed to be founded on fairly certain and maybe even some would argue self-evident principles were starting to be called into doubt. And so his whole worldview had been shattered. He was very, I guess, timid about asserting anything about the sciences, as he puts it, until he, at one point in his life, sits down and kind of starts over and begins again from the drawing board, destroys all of his previous beliefs, all of the things that he had previously believed, shakes all those foundations, and then sort of builds again from a more solid and certain foundation, so that he can avoid the traps and he can avoid the mistakes of the past that led to the necessity for a scientific revolution. He doesn't want to make the mistakes that can be traced back all the way back to Aristotle, maybe even further. So he's trying to demolish all of his previous opinions. And the method by which he's going to do this, he says, well, I can't go one by one at every belief that I have, all my beliefs, all my opinions, and then look at each one of them and try to attack them one by one. That would take forever. It would take too long. It would never end. I think I mentioned you might even forget about a few beliefs that you have, like things that are just mundane, like the fact that you believe you're sitting down right now, or the fact you believe you're listening to me. And so that's not the way he's going to achieve his goal of demolishing all of these previous beliefs. So how is he going to do it? He's going to attack the foundations of his beliefs. So according to him, and I would concur, certain beliefs that we hold are more important than others. Some beliefs are based on other beliefs that are more, you might say, primary beliefs. For instance, we talked about this last time. You believe that I'm talking right now. You believe that I'm talking to my computer screen, and you're hearing me through whatever device you're using. And you believe that this Zoom meeting is going on because you see it. You're looking at your computer. Your eyes see me. Maybe I could be a hologram or something like that. And so he says, okay, so a lot of my beliefs are based on my senses, but my senses could deceive me. My senses could be telling me that my professor's giving a lecture on Descartes and he's sitting in his office and he's annoyed by this roofer who's about to make a bunch of noise outside. But really, maybe it's all just a hologram, or maybe it's all just an illusion. Descartes kind of hesitates to go that far. He says, well, those are some really weird, improbable circumstances. Usually when my senses deceive me, it's in these very special cases, like someone's really far away and I mistake them for someone else. So it's when things are distant or when things are very close and my view, my perception is skewed somehow. But in general, can't I know that I'm sitting right here in front of my computer talking to you guys and giving a lecture of Descartes? Certainly it seems that this is what's going on. But then he brings up the notion of dreams, and he talks about how when you're dreaming, sometimes you don't know you're dreaming. In fact, most of the time, I would say, I rarely am aware that I'm dreaming. It's usually not until I wake up from a dream that I'm like, oh crap, no wonder that was so weird. No wonder that didn't make any sense. But even no matter how weird my dream is or how regular, I'm not really aware of it until I wake up. So Descartes sort of pondering, what if I'm dreaming now? You know, what if my whole life is a dream, let's say? Now, he knows that this is sort of maybe a crazy hypothesis, but you've got to remember, we talked about this last time, that he set himself a standard for knowledge that's pretty high. You might argue a little too high. If it's not certain and indubitable, right, unable to be doubted, if it's not certain and indubitable, I'm going to treat it as absurd. So if it's possible to doubt something, if it's possible that I'm wrong about something, I'm going to throw it in the false category, at least for now. So for all we know, we're living a dream. Maybe our whole life is a dream. He wants to eventually abandon this hypothesis, and he will. You'll see. It's not till really, I think, the end of the entire essay that he does away with this sort of idea that we could be dreaming and there's no way to distinguish between dreaming and being awake and all this. He addresses that in Meditation 6 when he's kind of wrapping things up. So it's kind of weird that he waits till the end to sort of address this. But you're going to see in a minute, he brings up another scenario that's even worse than the dream world scenario that I think he has to focus on. And maybe that's why he kind of forgets about the whole dream problem till the end of the essay. But, you know, for a moment here in the first meditation, he's sort of operating under the assumption that maybe we're all dreaming. Maybe my whole life, everything I've ever encountered in the whole world is a fiction, is a dream. So even if it were a dream, and this is exactly where I think I ended class last time, I asked this question. Let's just suppose that we are experiencing everything in our head. It's all just a dream. Wouldn't there still be some things that were true? Couldn't we know that certain things were true and existed and were real, even if they were just dreams? So I don't know if any of you have answers to that question. We might just have to go to Descartes, but I'm curious, what would be real if all that there was really just in your head? Well, what are dreams? Descartes compares dreams to painted images in your head, while you're sleeping. Now, of course, there were no cameras or, video cameras in the 1600s, so he couldn't use the analogy of a movie. So he's imagining paintings like in a museum, but they move, moving paintings, moving images in your head, right? What we would think of as a film. So if everything is really just a movie in your head, wouldn't there still be some things that are true, even if it was a dream? Okay, Ashley says, yeah, I would think so. There would still be. So what would still be true? What would still exist? No one has a clue. Well, what are movies made of? Like, okay, so dreams are movies in your head. What are movies made of? You take pictures. What are pictures made of? And no art majors in here. We have any art majors. What are the elements of composition of a photograph or a painting or what do you learn in your design class? No one. I guess there's no artist. That's kind of. I guess that's a big ask in a class with only 7 students here. So, okay, I'll get us started, I guess. Colors, wouldn't there still be colors? I mean, they might just be dream colors, sure, but they would exist. They'd only exist in your head, but there would still be orange and red and green. Those would still exist in some sense, just as ideas, but they'd still have some existence. So even in a dream world, colors would exist. What else? Anybody else got any clues? Any ideas? I keep getting a message on my screen that says my internet connection is unstable. I hope that my voice isn't cutting off and on. If it is, let me know. All right, guys, I guess no one has any clue, or y'all are just being really shy. Let me read what he says. This is on page 14, if you have the book that I told you to get. It's, I don't know, like a page or two into the first meditation. If you're using a different translation, you have different page numbers. It's like the 5th or 6th paragraph. He says something like, let's assume, for the sake of argument, that we are dreaming, and that such particulars as these are not true. That we're opening our eyes, moving our head, extending our hands. Perhaps we don't even have hands, or even a body at all. Nevertheless, it surely must be admitted that the things seen during slumber are, as it were, like painted images, which could only have been produced in the likeness of true things, and that therefore these original things, eyes, head, hands, and the whole body, are not imaginary things, but are true and exist. For indeed, when painters themselves wish to represent sirens and satyrs, these mythological beings or whatever, when they want to represent these things by means of especially bizarre forms, they surely cannot assign to them utterly new natures. Rather, they simply fuse together the members of various animals, right? So a satyr is just a goat and a man, you know? So even though that's a fictional, there are no satyrs. We've seen men, so things that we have images of in our mind must be based on things that are real. Even if they're just images in our mind, the components from which they're made must be real. So perhaps even if, let's say, the artists that make up these crazy images, even if they concoct something so utterly novel that nothing like it has ever been seen before, and thus it is something utterly fictitious and false, yet they certainly at the very least, the colors from which they fashion it ought to be true. So again, even if everything's a dream, the colors are real. The colors that the dream is made of are real. And by the same token, although even these general things like eyes, head, hands, and the like, even these could be imaginary, still one has to admit that at least certain other things that are even more simple and more universal are true. It is from these components, as if from true colors, that all those images of things that are in our thought are fashioned, be they true or false. So this is his sort of, all he's given us so far is colors. Has anybody thought of anything else while I read that passage? What else would still be true? Colors, what else? The next paragraph, he'll give you a list. This class of things appears to include corporeal nature in general, together with its extension, the shape of extended things, their quantity, their size and number, as well as the place where they exist, the time through which they endure, and the like. So I actually have a list that's a bit longer than this, but he says corporeal nature. What does corporeal mean? Does anybody know what the word corporeal means? Let me write that word up here. No one? Well, it comes from the Latin corpus, which means body, or flesh, right? So corporeal is having to do with the body. So even if, there would be some bodies, and maybe they'd be fictitious, but we'd still have a dream version of them in our head. Extension, what he means by extension it's not what you're thinking, probably. You're probably thinking extension. Oh, you mean like in time? Give me an extension on the due date for my paper. That's the more common use today. But actually, the more common use back then was extension in space. So he's talking about things having depth when he uses the word extension. So extension would still be a thing. You know, even if things are a dream, don't you have the experience of depth in this dream world? So extension is there. Shape, not just colors, but shapes. All colors have shapes. You know, there's not just a bunch of just formless stuff out there. Things have edges and stuff, edges and borders and lines. Shape, quantity, size, number, the place, the sense of place where they exist, time, okay? I think some of those I actually left off the list. I don't think I have time on my list, but here's what I have in my dream world. Colors, shapes, feelings. You still would have emotions. Whether or not you're dreaming, you're still, you know, when you feel fear in a dream, it's still fear, right? Whether or not it's dream fear or actual fear, it's still fear. So he would say feelings, and not just feelings in the sense of emotions, but you might say feelings in the sense of tactile, touch. That would still exist in the dream world. Sounds, tastes, smells, extension. Pretty much everything would still be there. You just would have to say, well, it's a dream. It's all in my head. So it's real as an idea. So it's sort of like just in my head, but it's all kind of there. He even adds math and geometry, the truths of mathematics and geometry. You know, those would still be in a dream world true. 2 + 2 would still be 4. You know, all the truths that we would derive from shapes, trigonometry, and Euclid's axioms, these would all still hold, he claims, in the dream world. So he hasn't quite achieved his goal at the outset of the first meditation to demolish all his beliefs. He's just kind of relegated them to his mind. He's like, well, I don't really know whether all the bodies are existing out there, but I do know even if they were in a dream, all the components that they're made up of, colors, shapes, sounds, the sort of simple, more general, more abstract components, those would have to be real. Maybe my body's fake. Maybe my whole identity's fake. It's all a dream identity. It's like that movie with the Jim Carrey. What's that movie where he's in this kind of a fake world? The Truman Show. I mean, it's a kind of an old movie. It came out in the 90s, I think. So some of you probably aren't familiar with it. But even if I was living in the Truman Show, right? Yeah, maybe my identity's fake. Maybe like my whole family and everything's fake, but it's still, I'm experiencing it, and it has a shape, and it has a quantity, and it has, you know, all these qualities are still there, even if it might just all be in my mind, even if it's all just a facade. Now, we're going to move to a much deeper level of skepticism pretty quick with Descartes here, and he's gonna achieve his goal in pretty short order with the next level. So he says, all right, well, let's just say that forget the dream world scenario. Let's up the ante. Let's make it even worse. Let's imagine that there's actually an evil genius who is manipulating me at all times. There's some powerful, cunning, evil genius. He doesn't want to blame God for this, you'll see, right? I'll read the passage, right? He wants to be, you know, pious and doesn't want to be blasphemous. So he's like, obviously God would not do this, but let's imagine there's an evil genius who's able to control everything that I think that I know, and is able to control my mind and able to control my experience. If that were the case, then I could doubt pretty much everything. Everything on this list right here goes out the window. Even mathematics and geometry, Descartes claims. The evil genius could make me think that 2 plus 2 is 4, when in fact it's actually some other number. At least this is his argument. I mean, you might want to push back on that, but he's making this assertion that in the evil genius scenario, right? Under this sort of assumption of an evil genius. Hold on a second. Sorry, guys. I'm losing you. And I'm gone. Okay, I think I'm back. Oh, please. Talking about shaky and cut the cord like the guys that did the siding did. Jeez. Anyway, so let me read this passage here where he introduces us to this evil genius hypothesis.
He doesn't believe this. He doesn't want to believe this. He's just being really hard on himself. I'm kind of tired of reading students' papers where they roll their eyes and he's crazy, or just comments from students in class. Was this guy smoking crack? What is on drugs? What is stupid? He knows this is stupid. He doesn't want to believe it. But remember, this guy's got a high stakes. Like, look, it's possible. If there were an evil genius, I wouldn't know it, and I would think that I was right when I wasn't. And so he wants to eventually abandon this hypothesis. That's his goal. He doesn't want to believe it. But until he has a good argument to destroy it, he's not going to let it go. So, remember, he's trying to construct a very robust, very reliable epistemology. He wants to have a very good theory of knowledge. He wants to make sure that any assertion he makes is well-grounded and certain. So he wants to wipe the slate clean and start from scratch from certain foundations that are absolutely certain, necessary, indubitable. He loves to use that word. And so the evil genius hypothesis is kind of a good way for him to clear the table really quick, see what he's got left, if anything. Okay, even if there's an evil genius, is there something I could still know? And if not, how can I disprove this and know at least something? So this is where he's at. He's kind of at the end of the first meditation. He's achieved his initial goal of doubting everything, but he's committed himself to a pretty radical form of skepticism. So let's read here the passage where he introduces us to the evil genius, and then we can finally move on to the second meditation, and we'll see how he deals with this. How is he going to deal with this hypothesis? How is he going to move beyond his skeptical attitude and develop a robust rationalist epistemology? Because remember, he's a rationalist. We covered that last time. If you don't remember rationalism, it's the view that knowledge is based on reason. And so he wants to think, knowledge is possible. I can know certain things. I don't want to be an absolute skeptic. But at this point, he can't really say much because he's kind of like, okay, the whole world might not exist. Everything might be a lie. Everything might be a deception. I might not know anything for all I can tell, the evil genius is manipulating me. This is the very last paragraph of Meditation 1. He says, accordingly, I will not suppose a supremely good God, the source of truth. Yeah, remember, he's like, I don't want to blame God for this, right? God would never be this way. So instead, I'm going to suppose that there's an evil genius, supremely powerful and clever, who has directed his entire effort at deceiving me. I will regard the heavens, the air, the earth, colors, shapes, sounds, and all external things as nothing but the bedeviling hoaxes of my dreams, which he lays snares for my credulity, or with which he lays snares for my credulity. I will regard myself as not having hands, or eyes, or flesh, or blood, or any senses, but as nevertheless falsely believing that I possess all these things. I will remain resolute and steadfast in this meditation, And even if it is not within my power to know anything true, it is certainly within my power to take care resolutely to withhold my assent to what is false, lest this deceiver, however powerful, however clever he may be, has any effect on me. But this undertaking is arduous, and a certain laziness brings me back to my customary way of living. I am not unlike a prisoner who enjoyed an imaginary freedom during his sleep, but when he later begins to suspect that he's dreaming, fears being awakened, and nonchalantly conspires with these pleasant illusions. In just the same way, I fall back of my own accord into my old opinions and dread being awakened, lest the toilsome wakefulness which follows upon a peaceful rest must be spent thenceforward, not in the light, but among the inextricable shadows of the difficulties now brought forward. And yet, quite a few difficulties if we follow Descartes here. He's committed himself at this point to a kind of global skepticism. Everything's up for grabs. Everything could be false. For all he knows, it's all an illusion, even mathematics, even geometry, even other people. And this is something that he sort of seems to, I wouldn't say he avoids it, but he seems to overlook it. But he's not just committed himself to skepticism at this point. He's also committed himself to a sort of solipsism. What is that? Well, for all he knows, all that exists is what he's experiencing. So there might not even be other people. So, the fact that there are other people that I'm I guess there's some people typing, so I haven't heard a voice yet on the Zoom meeting. I'm assuming there's people that are typing those words and y'all aren't robots. But how do I know that? For all I know, I'm the only person alive. I don't want to think that. That's kind of crazy. But that's sort of where Descartes is at this point. Not only is he a skeptic, but he's a solipsist in the most literal sense of that word. For all I know, I'm the only mind that there is, and everything else is false. But is there something that he can know for sure? He thinks there is. And ultimately, so even if, let's say, there is this evil genius lurking over me, there's one thing I can know for sure that I can never doubt. And ultimately, I can defeat, he thinks, I can defeat this hypothesis. I can show that it's false. Pretty simple. All I need to do is prove that God exists. That's pretty simple. And he thinks he's going to do it. He's not going to do this until he gets to the third meditation. You're going to see, in fact, there's several proofs that he's going to offer for God's existence. I don't want to get y'all all excited. I don't really think they're very strong proofs. He does. But honestly, I think most philosophers will tell you this, that most proofs for God's existence, or proofs against it, against the existence, proofs for or against are usually pretty weak. But he thinks that by proving God, he can disprove the evil genius. And if he does that, he defeats skepticism, he defeats his solipsism, and he can kind of start developing a more robust rationalist epistemology. But what's the connection, do you think? Is anybody kind of seeing the logic there? Why does proving God disprove this hypothesis? What's the connection? How does proving God disprove the evil genius hypothesis? No one kind of sees what the possible connection could be. Also, he's assuming that God is good, let's say. Hint, hint. So how would that help him in this scenario? If I can prove God, that disproves evil genius. Why? If God was good, and just and fair, etc. Would God allow you to be constantly deceived and believe everything false? And have it to be where everything you believe is false? Is that something a good God would do? Is anybody listening?
I personally feel like you can't really point I see where you're coming from, but your question is a rhetorical question in the sense of you're asking different people based off different, I would say, beliefs. And personally, I would honestly say I wouldn't point the finger at God. We are quick to do that just because, like, why God? Why me? Shit, why not you?
Well,
I don't feel like God has a...
Well, I don't know if you're understanding the question. I'm not trying to point the finger at God. In fact, I think Descartes is doing his best to not do that. In fact, and honestly, I think he's not doing it. I mean, who knows what his motives are, but you could argue he's doing it just because he doesn't want to get in trouble with the church. You know, I don't think so, though. I think I'm going to say he's in good faith here. I think that, so he's not trying to point the finger at God. Why wouldn't he want to point the finger at God? It's not just because he wants to be a good Christian boy. It's not just because he doesn't want to offend God and doesn't want to get punished. He actually thinks there's like a logical reason. Like he doesn't really he thinks like rationally it doesn't make sense. So again, I understand why you made the response you made, but I don't think like that's not what I'm getting at. I mean, he's already avoided that. That's the whole reason he came up with the evil genius hypothesis, is to avoid making God into a deceiver. And making mistakes God's fault, right? He doesn't want to put any blame on God. God's supposed to be perfect, and nothing bad comes from God. So, yeah, that's not the reason. Someone's got it. So, because if you believe in God, you believe in his principles, you're kind of halfway there, right? What do you mean by that, Chrissy? Chrissy wrote, if you believe in God, you believe in his principles as well. You're kind of there. The thing with Descartes is he wants to be a good, follower of the church, but he also wants to do science and philosophy, and he thinks that those two things can coexist peacefully, but they need to not step on each other's toes. He thinks that math and science and all that and philosophy are one thing, and religion and spirituality are another. And he thinks that religion and spirituality has more to do with morals. So he never really wrote about morality. He didn't think that you could really do philosophy of ethics, things that are, quantifiable. That's what philosophy is all about. Something you can put a number on and measure and use math to analyze. But again, and I think Lola, you were saying this, that depends on your beliefs. It depends on, yes. And what is his belief about God? You probably don't know the specifics, but he was a member of the church. So just in a general sense, whether you're like a Catholic, a Protestant, or whatever flavor of Christian you are, does it make sense for that God that you believe in? I mean, I'm not religious, but I'm assuming from your comments that most of you are. That God, does it make sense that he would allow a scenario like this to occur? Would it make sense for this God to allow poor Descartes to be tricked by an evil genius constantly and all of his beliefs are false? Would that make sense?
I think it just depends on how you view God. Like if you view God as like this, well, yes, he is our savior, but like a being that will never allow anything bad to happen to you and your life is just supposed to be perfect because of God, then no, he's not all
Well,
that. But
yeah, go ahead, finish your thought.
But if you look at him in the sense of he basically gives us the layout and it's yours, you have the free will to follow or not. And if things go left, it could likely be your fault, or it could be like, it's many reasons why things
Well,
can go wrong in your life.
these are all really good comments, but again, I think you're kind of missing the point here, because what y'all are talking about actually is something he's going to address later in, I think, the fourth meditation, when he talks about, well, how is it that I make errors? Like, why am I not perfect? Why do I make mistakes? Why didn't God make me so that I never forget to carry the one when I do a long division? You know, why does God allow me to make mistakes in math? You know, and he explains that, right? He explains why, and you know, someone, I forget which one of you, Michaela or Lola or Nia, who said free will. He brings up free will, but he's not talking about, he's not asking for perfection. This is worse. Like, this is like absolute imperfection. It's one thing that God's like, okay, well, God has to make the universe a certain way, so it's not perfect. You know, you have free will, you know, all this stuff, and you're responsible, etc. But in this scenario, it's even worse than that. It's like nothing you do is right. Everything you learn is false. There's no hope for truth. There is no way you will ever, ever, ever know the truth. Everything you ever know is absolutely false. You are constantly deceived, and there's no hope of ever knowing anything ever. Would God put you in a situation like that? Does that make sense for a good God to allow one of his creations to be constantly deceived about truth with no hope of salvation and no hope of knowing anything true? Does that make any sense? Okay, I guess some of y'all are not going to let go on this. You're like, well, maybe it does, maybe it does. He doesn't think it does. He thinks that's not fair. That wouldn't be cool. He gets it for like what y'all are saying. Yeah, of course you can't be perfect. Humans are flawed. We are capable of sin. Again, he's arguing from within this sort of Christian theology. He's trying to keep it secular. He's trying to keep it as abstract as possible. So he talks about God in very general terms, you know. But he says at the very least, can't we all agree that God wouldn't allow an evil genius to constantly deceive us? But I guess y'all don't agree. Y'all are like, oh no, God would let. Sometimes he could. I want to hear an argument, though. It's one thing to say, but I'm not hearing a good argument. All your comments, like so far, like it seems to me like y'all are saying, oh well, you can't blame God for stuff. You can't. But that's not the point. He's not doing that. He's just saying, you know, if